don't know, we're going to talk about something that I haven't really heard too many other people talk about. I know a few local guides in the area feel pretty passionate about fishing smallmouth bass around this time of year. And so for those of you that don't know me, my name is Nick. Yeah, I'm a tying ambassador for Drift relatively recently. I've been tying flies for pretty much as long as I can remember. Been fly fishing since I guess I was about, I think I was about 11 or 12 when I first started fly fishing. So pretty much got the bug right away. My focus, like everybody's, it seems, like when they first started fly fishing, was trout flies and trout fishing. It was driving up to the Grand every weekend, begging my dad to take me to the Grand because that's where I thought all the big fish were, and only in the Grand. Driving by many other rivers on the way to just fish that one famous tailwater. That's really what made me fall in love with the sport. But I never really liked bass. I thought bass weren't really a fly fishing fish. I thought if you're fly fishing, you should be fishing for trout. And it really took a long time for me to kind of come around to fishing for smallmouth bass. It wasn't until actually a local shop that's no longer around in the Fergus area. Some of the guides there and the owner started to fill my young head full of great stories of trophy bass and some of the nearby fisheries that I started to sort of take notice. But even still, they're like not as pretty as brown trout, and it just didn't seem to go along as much with my idea of what fly fishing was. It wasn't until I think I was around 15 or 16, and one of those guides actually offered to take me out. Being a kid, I didn't have any money to pay him, but he took me fly fishing for smallmouth on one of the local rivers, and completely blew my mind as to what some of the other opportunities are for fly fishing here in Ontario. So that was kind of the start. And then, of course, you go through different transitions in life, and moving away and then coming back and getting into things like steelhead, and then being obsessed with I got really into fishing some of the backcountry brook trout lakes for a while. Really in the last like 6-7 years, I've really come back around to fishing resident trout and fishing smallmouth bass in the summertime. I'm not sure how many of you guys are really into bass fishing, or maybe some of you have never done it before and are just a little bit interested in it and looking to kind of diversify some of the quarry you're chasing. So I'm going to try to talk about it from a beginner level, but then I really want to get detailed. I think talking about specifically bass in the fall was what we really wanted to get into tonight, because it is quite a bit different than maybe some of those summer approaches that people have been taking to their bass fly fishing. So as I was saying, I wasn't born a bass lover by any sort of stretch of the imagination. I kind of learned to love them over time, and as I kind of got to know their habits, I find that more and more they're such a complicated fish. They're not the super simple, easy to catch fish that a lot of people, or a lot of fly anglers especially, kind of chalk them up to be. A lot of times you can get really, really dialed into these fish, and using like special tactics to catch them really will benefit your fly fishing in the long run if you're going to chase these guys. So they are, honestly, in my opinion, one of the perfect fly rod species. They're right in that size range that they fight amazing on a lighter setup. You don't need anything special to chase bass. So I know we're putting on this event from a fly shop, but you don't need a special rod or anything like that to chase smallmouth bass, especially here in Ontario. Your normal 5 or 6 weight trout rod is perfectly fine for most of the situations we're going to find ourselves in. But where I really want to stress is a fly box that's geared towards bass will really improve your chances of kind of landing a trophy, or at least getting into the numbers of fish. So we're going to get all into that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about river bass, but then I also want to talk about lake bass too, because that's actually was a big part of my fly fishing for smallmouth, and especially in the fall. There's great opportunities on some of the local lakes, and lakes even just a couple hours away. So if anybody's from cottage country or has access to a little canoe or something like that, there's so much opportunity to catch smallmouth in the area. Really, I'm not sure where everybody's from, but I'm guessing everybody's from Southern Ontario. If you're not from Southern Ontario, please let me know and throw it in the chat box, because I'm going to ramble on about Southern Ontario. And so I'd love to know if somebody's not from our area.
I think we're pretty well all Ontario based, but I know there's actually
okay.
one joining us from the States tonight too.
Oh, awesome. What state do we have?
Ohio, I believe. So
That's basically Canada.
it's basically, uh,
So, I mean, I think anything I'm talking about here is going to apply to them because actually, where most of my bass fishing knowledge or I guess theory comes from is from Pennsylvania anglers. I look to Pennsylvania anglers for a lot of my fly fishing just because their rivers and their fisheries are very similar to ours here in Ontario. And there's some amazing authors and amazing literature out there. In Pennsylvania. There's just a lot of fly fishermen there. Not so many in Southern Ontario, although it is growing. A lot of times I look to them. And one of the big ones is Bob Clouser. I mean, I don't think he needs any introduction. He is kind of the guru when it comes to smallmouth bass. And so a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are things I picked up from anglers like Bob Clouser, and then just try to put into theory myself and realized I'm not the most inventive fly angler. I like to copy other people and just kind of make it my own. And I remember listening to something that George Daniel was saying that he doesn't invent his own fly patterns. He looks to others that have 4 more days on the water to come up with them, and then he basically just steals them. That's kind of what I do.
that's awesome. I like
So
it.
yeah. So
Good chance
before,
as well for me to throw in. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
George Daniel will be doing a presentation with us in January. So
Yeah, I'm coming to that one because
yeah,
holy smokes, does that guy, that's a next level presenter right there. So
we had him up a couple
yeah,
years ago to do an in-person talk, and yeah, it's
yeah, yeah,
anyway.
he's really something. He's former Team USA coach for fly fishing and now a huge instructor and teaches at Penn State and stuff like that. So anybody who doesn't know. But yeah, as I was mentioning, a lot of our rivers are very similar to the rivers in Pennsylvania. I'm gonna just, I'm not sponsored by Bob Clouser, but this book like changed my life when it comes to small bass fly fishing. Chris, I think you're probably familiar with it. You're nodding your head. This is Bob Clouser's book, Fly Fishing Smallmouth Bass and Rivers. Man, this basically should just say fly fishing Ontario smallmouth bass because everything that I've picked up from this book and put into practice here in Ontario has really helped my fishing. So I'm sure you sell at the shop, Chris. I know you have quite the library there to shop. So yeah, please support your local fly shop and don't give your money to Jeff Bezos. That would be preferred. So yeah. One of the things that I really wanted to get into is just how most fly anglers believe that bass are just super easy to catch. And, in the summertime, they can be. I lived in the Hamilton area. Now I've relocated to Elora. So I've always been pretty close to the Grand River. For any local anglers, the Grand River is just an absolute smallmouth bass factory. Tons and tons of fish there. Great place to learn how to fly fish. Great place to learn how to bass fish. In the summertime, most of my bass fishing is really centered around fishing crayfish flies. I love tying crayfish flies. I don't know if it's because they kind of are similar to bonefish flies, and I never get to fish bonefish. So I tie way too many different crayfish patterns, but it's very fun, and they're super effective for summertime bass fishing. And then also a lot of woolly buggers, even tried Euro nymphing, big nymphs and stuff for small bass. And there's just so many different food items for them in the summertime that they're eating all kinds of different things. It's really once that cold weather sets in that I notice the bass, they do tend to change their diet. And I put away the crayfish flies. As soon as you start getting those cooler nights, I think what's happening is that the crayfish, the activity levels really are reduced. So they're kind of going and hiding in the rocks and they're not as available to the bass, because I definitely notice a drop in their effectiveness. And so what I usually do, especially end of September, coming into October, is switch to minnow flies, or at least something representing some of the minnows that are found in the local river systems. So what we're tying tonight is going to be all 3 of them actually are minnow flies. All 3 of them are very different applications, and I'm going to talk about each one individually as to how I fish and rig and use each one. But all 3 are extremely proven effective for me, and so I hope that you guys will find them effective as well. So I don't know. Is that a good enough intro, Chris? Should we get tying and stop talking about talking about me? All right.
Perfect. Yeah, if you're able to pan the camera down, maybe.
I will. Yeah, I will for sure. All right. So first fly. Hopefully you guys are going to be able to see this if I tilt it down like this. I'll make it centered so it's a little bit better for your view as well. How's that?
Yeah, looks good.
It's okay. It's a pretty big fly, so I think you guys are going to be able to see it.
I think
I'm gonna do my shirt up, so then you have a little bit more of a. That's why I wore a gray sweater, so you'd be able to see it a little bit better.
it might be inside better, yeah.
Yeah. So this fly, again, like I said before, I like to copy a lot of bass anglers' flies, and it's essentially a Kreelex minnow. That's the finished fly right there. So I'll hold it up to my camera. It's basically a Kreelex minnow. Kreelex minnows typically use like a almost a flashabou type of material, and I actually have some right here. Like that's a Kreelex minnow right there. And so as you can see, they're flashy. They're basically just tinsel on a hook, tied in the shape of a clouser minnow. So super simple bass fly. These are great. What I don't really love about like the actual flashabou Kreelex is that it doesn't really look like the shape of a minnow. The one I'm going to tie tonight is actually tied with ripple ice fiber, and it actually looks far more with the profile of a minnow. And so I really appreciate that. Everybody knows the clouser minnow is a dynamite smallmouth bass fly. And this is really just a variation of a clouser minnow. Some of the important things on this fly though, that I think are very important are not so much the color, but it's a darker shade. This is my river bass fly for the fall. And the reason why I'm fishing this in the rivers is because typically around October, we start to get some rains coming into our river systems. And so there's usually a little bit of color on the water. A darker fly just shows a nicer silhouette. If you're going to go fish the Middle Grand in October, chances are it might be running a little higher. If you're going to go fish the Maitland, the Saugeen, any of these bigger systems, they're going to be running a little colored typically by October. And so that's why I'm really fishing that color scheme, if you will, or that shade. I've experimented with blue and with black and with purple and all these different colors, and they all work very, very well. What I haven't had so much luck with is the whites and the bright colors at this time of year, and that's just my own personal preference. But the other thing about this fly is it's all synthetic material. So that's important for when you're getting into some of the deeper spots that bass hold in the fall. The synthetic material doesn't absorb water in the same way. So it's actually going to sink a lot better than something like, say, bucktail, which the traditional clouser minnow is tied with. So that's another little tip that I grabbed from Bob Clouser himself. He actually ties his flies that he wants to sink very quickly with a synthetic hair as opposed to a natural fiber. And again, that's just been really effective for me. A lot of times I like to tie clousers with smaller eyes. But again, I was just going along with those same school of thought that I really want this to drop in the water column. So that's why I've gone with the super large lead eyes on this fly. I only really tie it in one size. I don't tie it in multiple sizes because they seem to like this size. And so this is a size 1 hook that I'm tying it on today. So I'm gonna start tying it. And Chris, you jump in whenever you feel like it's good. I'm going with red thread today. You can use black thread. You could use any color thread. The fish don't really care what color thread it is. But we're gonna just start tying on the hook here.
Did you mention what size thread that was?
It's a 6/0 thread. I'm not a very picky guy when it comes to thread. You can use 3/0 if you're really gentle. You could even use 8, but 6/0 just seems to be about right. This is a uni thread, but whatever your favorite thread is would be more than sufficient for tying a fly like this. Especially when you're tying with the synthetics, they tie in really nicely, and you don't have to worry too much about something like bucktail that you might have to really put a lot of tension on. So. Gonna get going here. So I'm gonna just tie just a little bit of a thread base here. And if you've never worked with lead eyes before, they can be kind of tricky. I remember when I was just starting out, I hated tying with lead eyes. They always rolled around the fly. It was always kind of tricky to kind of set them. And it wasn't until I think I watched some YouTube video or something on how to properly set them that it became just so much easier. So I'm gonna show you a little trick. I got a thread base there. It's just a few thread wraps down the shank of the hook. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna bring my thread up to about 1/3 of the way towards the eye. So leaving about 1/3 of the hook gape between the eye and where my thread is. And the reason why I'm gonna do that is because I'm just gonna continually wrap, and I'm gonna in the same spot, and I'm actually gonna make a ball. So it's a little bit of an extra step that takes some time, but it'll be worth it in the long run. So just bear with me here. Okay. So I don't know if you guys can see that. You probably can't because my lens isn't exactly a macro lens, but there's a little bit of a thread ball right here. It's pretty small, but it's going to have a pretty specific purpose. A lot of tires will create two balls, and they'll sit the eyes right in between the two balls, just to kind of create a little bit of a groove for them to sit. But I found that just one ball seems to work fine, and I just ram my thread up against that. So here is our lead eyes. These are that large size. And I don't know what it is, but I love red eyes for smallmouth bass. Maybe it's because smallmouth bass have red eyes. I don't know, but all my brown trout flies have yellow eyes, and then all my smallmouth bass flies have red eyes. So I don't know. I don't know if that makes a difference, but the hardest part of the fly is going to be tying these eyes in. So what I'm going to do is just try to lean the little piece of lead in between the eyes against that ball of thread that I've made. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold them in place just with my finger, and I'm going to make 5 relatively tight wraps in one direction. So that's 5 wraps. And then I'm going to hold the eyes with my thumb so they don't move. And then I'm going to go figure 8 style, and I'm going to do 5 more wraps. And that seems to be pretty good to kind of get them relatively secured. Now they're not super anchored yet, but at least they're not going to go anywhere when I'm tying. The next part I'm going to do, it's kind of hard to explain. I hope you can see, is that instead of wrapping my thread around the hook shake, I'm going to actually wrap it around the base of the eyes only. So I'm going to kind of weave my thread around the eyes. And what that does is that just sort of cinches the thread, that the previous thread wraps that I've done, and it kind of pinches them down onto the eyes. So they're pretty well on there. I'm going to do about 5 more wraps in a figure 8 style over the eyes, and that should be enough to secure them. So I'm just going around now the hook shank and the eyes a couple times. And I think that should be good. They're on. They shouldn't roll around now. You might want to put a little drop of glue or something if you're super particular, but I lose these flies like crazy because I'm fishing them near the bottom. So I do not care too much about making sure they're super durable, because I know I'm going to lose them in all the wood and everything like that. So the next step for this fly is I'm going to take that Ripple ice fiber. I don't know if you guys have ever used this. I love this stuff. This stuff is awesome. I think it's a relatively new material, right, Chris?
I think it's been out a few years now. Yeah, it's cool stuff.
That's pretty new to me, man. I don't know. I don't remember this like from back in the day, and I know you've been tying forever too. So yeah, it's really neat. And so it's kind of like shredded mylar, is what I think it is. And so in order to work with it, you're just going to take a pinch out of the package like this, and I got a pinch, and that's probably not going to be enough. So I'm going to grab a little more. All right, so you got this kind of messy piece of flashy material here. It looks amazing in that light already. It's all like glistening and stuff. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of stack it with my fingers here. So if you can see what I'm doing, I'm just kind of making sure that none of those fibers are going to fall out when I tie them in. And so now I got a nice big clump of Ripple ice fiber. And all that I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it in at the eye of the hook. Or sorry, not at the eye of the hook. I didn't do my tail yet. I'm actually going to do a little bit of a tail on the fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically gauge how long I want the fly to be. I think the tail should basically be another hook length long. So this fly should really just be a few inches long. So if I actually measure it to there, I'm going to go just a little bit longer than the size of the hook shank, and then I'm just going to tie it in. And you can be messy with this. This fly is not a super fancy fly. And then I'm going to clip it. It doesn't have to be neat. The fish won't care. All right, so we got a tail. And then I'm just going to make a little bit of a thread body just to kind of tidy it up a little bit. And then I'm going to bring my thread to the top of to the eye of the hook. So that's stage 1. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take more of this Ripple ice fiber. And again, same thing I did last time, is I'm just going to kind of stack the fibers just so they all kind of line up. And that's good enough. And this time I'm going to tie it in at the eye of the hook. Now, the length of this is actually going to be just kind of a little bit shorter than the tail. And what we're doing is we're kind of making a little bit of a minnow taper or a belly to the fly, if you will. So I'm going to tie it with the ahead of the eyes and a couple thread wraps. Really 3 or 4 thread wraps is all you need. This stuff ties in so easy. And then I have all this excess here. I actually just like to fold it back just to give a little bit of a profile to the fly and push that back. So now it's kind of like a, I don't know, a minnow with a mohawk or something like that. And it looks kind of ugly right now. But in typical clouser fashion, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull the fibers back towards the rear. And I'm just gonna bring my thread back and I'm gonna make a few wraps just behind the eyes. And I don't know, that could be a gilt plate or something, if you will, but it just sort of lays everything back. And now I got that nice sort of minnow taper going on with this fly. So that's the tail and the belly. Now, in order to tie the belly, or sorry, the top of the fly in, or the back of the fly, best thing to do is use a rotary vise. But as I don't have my rotary vise right now, I'm actually going to take my hook out of the vise. If I can get my fly out of the vise. And now it's back in, but it's upside down. So that's actually the way that the fly is going to ride in the water. I actually don't have any black ripple ice fiber at the moment. I just ordered that from Drift today, and as good as Drift's shipping policy is, it doesn't come same day delivery. But I'm going to use the same blue ripple ice fiber that I used for the belly. All right, so same step again. This is a one material fly, guys. Like, can't get any simpler.
So if somebody was a little unsure on, say, density of material here, it might be kind of tricky to gauge. Would you prefer this fly to be maybe tied a little sparse or a little on the heavier side for profile?
That's an awesome question, Chris. I think you've tied a clouser minnow before. So my biggest beef with other people's clouser minnows is that they're often too thick and bulky. I mentioned before, you just want this thing to get down. As soon as I'm done the fly, because I have a hard time doing 2 things at once, I'm going to, I'll explain to you exactly how I fish it. But really, you want this fly to get down and low in the water column. Less material to pull down, the better. So the nice thing about this material is that it kind of gives the illusion of bulk. The fibers are kind of going every which direction, but for the most part, you want to err on the side of caution and add less as opposed to more. I bet you if you just added a few strands of this would still be killer. You don't need much. So yeah, definitely less. Okay, so the next part here, I'm just going to take that same ripple ice fiber that I've been using all along, and I am going to use the top or the wing the same length as the belly that we tied in before. So this is going to look a little ugly just for a second. It's about halfway down the length of the fiber, just so everybody knows. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do about 3 or 4 wraps here. And then I'm not going to waste that material at the front, and I'm just going to kind of push it back. And then I'm going to make a nice neat thread head.
One more quick question. You say you don't really bother tying this in other colors. Do you ever find that this is too flashy for your taste? Is there any other material that you like that's maybe a little more dull and natural, or do you find this?
Yeah, actually, man, that's another great question, Chris. Anybody familiar with Steve Farrar's flash fiber? I think it's mainly for saltwater. I have some of it here. Actually, I have some here in black. It's just a little less flashy, if you can see that right there. That material is awesome. I love that stuff. I use it in all kinds of different flies. Tying this exact same fly, this exact same way with this material that just has less flash is a very good way to go. To be fully honest with you, I usually err very flashy with these flies though, and the bass seem to like them. So I don't know. I do like that other material though. I've actually got a few other minnows tied with those in my box right now. So anyway, we're basically done this fly, guys. I'm just going to throw a quick whip finish on here. And yeah, and I think we will be good to go. It's nice to have a Band-Aid on your finger. There, if you have some head cement, drop a little head cement on there. Let's see. I always like to roll the fibers in my fingers. I don't know if you guys can see that there, but it is one heck of a flashy looking minnow. And I don't know what it is about this color. Bob Clouser, he rails on and on about fishing black and purple colored minnows. His theory is that they're taking darters. So anybody ever seen a rainbow darter under the water? They're a beautiful little minnow. They got all kinds of blues and purples and oranges in their flanks. And he believes that the purpley bluey colors really imitate those darters very well. I think it might have something to do with the silhouette that it casts. That's my own little theory there. But I'm not going to argue with Bob Clouser. This is a deadly fly. I've in rivers. This is my go-to fly for fishing in the fall. Caught lots and lots of big bass on this fly. It takes not very long to tie. I'm not sure how long it took, but not a very long time. You can tie lots. If we get into a little bit about, especially rivers where bass are holding in the rivers, I usually find them sitting pretty close to boulders. They're bass after all. They love boulders. They love wood. The best way to think of a big bass in a river is just an extra lazy brown trout. They don't like that faster water. I have caught them in the summertime in some pocket water, but they really seem to gravitate towards that slower water. And then as fall comes around, they're going and looking for even slower water than they were in the summertime. One of the other things that I'll often look for is holes that very slow sections of river that are near areas of river that have current. So if you see those huge foam pockets that just have a tiniest amount of current in them, the bass are probably going to be in that pocket. They're not going to be out in the raging river. As the water gets really cold in the fall, their metabolism slows down. So if you're looking to get out there and target some big river bass, I would say fish during the warmest parts of the day. That's like an excellent idea, especially as we start to get cooler and cooler nights. And target the water that's a little slower because they're going to move into that because they're just getting lazier and lazier, but they do want to feed. Another area that I found them and had extremely good fishing is on some of the really sunny flats. So areas of the river that's tending to warm up in the sunshine of the midday sun. I'm not sure if it's because the bass are moving onto those areas because, maybe there's insects that brings the bait fish, which brings the bass. I'm not sure if that's what it is or if it's just they're actually sunning themselves. I've heard some anglers say that they're actually sunning themselves to warm up their own metabolism so then they can feed. So watch out for those areas, but definitely fishing a simple fly in the river is a good idea. So just in case you guys are losing them on the bottom all the time, I carry like 25 different or 25 of one type of fly just because I know I'm going to lose it when I go out there. But yeah, I think that's my little, I call it a dark day Kreelex just because it's a darker color, but you could also call it a ripple ice clouser, if you will, or yeah. So I see some stuff coming up in the comment box.
A couple of questions. I've got a bit of one too. So
Okay.
You make that, I think, is a good point about them being lazy fish. I mean, no fish really wants to fight more current than it has to. Just kind of interesting because if you think in lakes, a lot of the time current areas are actually a bit of a draw for smallmouth. But so they're sitting in slower water. They're a little lazier. Is that how you think about fishing the fly, though? Are you afraid fish is fast?
I can't believe I skipped over that. So that is like the most crucial information that I could really pass on to everybody. You guys might see if you're watching like social media and stuff like that. There's a lot of interest in some of the other states where anglers are throwing these huge articulated flies for smallmouth now. I mean, I would think that definitely works well, and it seems to work very well out there. But I've tried it a bit here, and I haven't had very much success with it. I don't know, Chris, if you've ever tried that for smallmouth bass and throwing those like kind of big, dungeons and things like that. hasn't worked for me. A lot of the rivers that we're fishing here in Ontario, the bass are very trouty in nature, very small flies. Even the crayfish flies I'm throwing are like a couple inches long. They're not very big. And some of these fish are super particular on the size of fly. Now you're saying, do I fish this fly very slowly? Absolutely. You cannot fish it slow enough. The way that I'm typically fishing bass is not even with a line strip. I'm using a floating line with a very long leader, typically very long leader in the bass sense, 9 or 10 feet long leader. I usually use just straight 2X or 1X or 0X, and I just make it level because this has a ton of weight on it. You do not need to have a tapered leader to throw a fly like this. You just got to basically huck it out there. Sorry, purists, a lot of times I'll even stick a split shot right on the nose of this fly, and it's basically a jig at that point in time. And not using your line, not using your hand to strip, because stripping is going to move the fly a little bit faster and a little bit further, but just tiny little rod tips, and as slow as you can go. In the fall particularly, is just an absolutely killer presentation for smallmouth bass. So I brought a friend of mine out fly fishing, and we went to go target bass, and he showed up with his whole trout streamer box of dungeons and dragons and everything else. But he was hauling his streamers back, and I was just pretty much dead drifting these minnows, and his eyes were definitely opened and to that really slow presentation, because that's what they're looking for. Darters themselves, like if this is a darter imitation, then they're basically just kind of darting in amongst the rocks. They're not moving like a bait fish ripping across the whole riverbank. And so if you haven't tried fishing that way, I highly recommend doing so. Yeah.
Cool.
That's my presentation.
Connor had asked if we could talk line types and leader seps. I think that probably answers that pretty well for this fly, and I'm sure we can do a little dive on each fly with regard to that.
Yeah, I'd like that, because I actually do it a little bit different for each fly. That little clouser darter minnow, long floating line and very long level tippet. That's the way to go with a fly like that.
Awesome. And then John was asking if you had fished this in lakes as well. I'm sure you could. Is this a real confidence fly for you on lakes as well?
For me, no. I actually have never even tried. Maybe I've tried it, but I don't think I've gone to it as like one of my go-tos. No. I'd like to know actually how it fishes. I probably should, but I might primarily think of it as a river fly. But that's not to say that it doesn't work on lakes. The next two, though, absolutely awesome lake flies and river flies, but I particularly like them on lakes.
Cool. All right, awesome. That's all the questions.
All right, that's my simplest one. Now we're going to get a little bit more complicated. All right, so this fly, I'm actually going to, let's jump ahead and do the third fly here, because this one might take a little bit longer. So what we're going to tie here, I'm going to show you the fly. This is an interesting fly for me. So I remember back in the day when Kelly Gallup's streamer book came out, and everybody on the Grand was just kind of cluing into the whole thing of big streamers, big fish. Everybody seemed to have their own streamer pattern that they made up and named. It was the Wild West in Streamerland, and I was pretty young. I think this is back in 2004, maybe, that I'm thinking about, or 2003. And I wanted to have a streamer pattern. So I came up with this fly that was basically a synthetic fiber on a upside down hook with big eyes on it, and thought I just created the greatest streamer that had ever been created. And then it wasn't until I opened Dave Whitlock's book and saw the sheep minnow that I realized I just ripped off Dave Whitlock, and he had already made this fly a thing. So either way, that's okay. I actually tied this fly in more like brown trout kind of colors, like in olives and yellows and stuff like that. And it wasn't a bad trout streamer. It caught a few fish, but then I used to take this trip every fall with my dad, and we'd go up to a Muskoka lake that we knew a guy who had a place on, and we'd always fish for bass there. And that's really what started me off fly fishing for smallies. And there used to be this river mouth that entered the lake, and in the fall, in September, they would just stack up right there at this river mouth. And you could go in with waders and you could cast poppers to these fish. And oh my goodness, they would like blow up on these poppers if you just hit the timing right. Well, one year we couldn't go in September. I don't remember why, it was a long time ago. So we went the second week of October. Sure enough, there was no fish at the river mouth at all. The next like couple days, we were hitting all the different shoals where we knew the fish sat, and we didn't hit a single fish. It was turning out to be like a really crappy weekend as far as fish was concerned. It was cold, it was rainy, and it just didn't feel like the bass fishing that we knew. Well, my dad was throwing, I think, a rapella on this like sand flat that we're like, we've never even fished here. Let's just try this sand flat that's like close to deep water. It's pretty far from the river mouth, but we'll give it a shot. And sure enough, he starts hammering the smallies, and they're burping up all of these minnows. And all of the minnows are long, thin, gray and white minnows with a little bit of pink and a little bit of silver. They're either smelts or a shiner. They're always half digested, so we couldn't really see what they were. But these fish were gorging themselves on these minnows. And so I was still trying to catch them on the fly at that point. So we just anchored off this sand flat and started casting some of the minnow flies that we had. I had some of those sheep minnow looking things that I tied up in my box that were, I think they were just pure white. And had an absolutely wonderful time catching them. And what they had done is, because the weather was so cold, those fish again had pushed up into a shallow sand flat where there was some warmer water. That when the sun hit, I imagine that was the first part of the lake to start to get warm. And it felt like every smallmouth bass in the lake was there. And I think that's pretty typical of the fall, is that when you might not find the bass everywhere. You might not find them in the summer spots that you're familiar with, but when you do find them, you're going to find a lot of them, and they're going to be super hungry. And so the next year, I remember coming back to that exact same spot. We actually had such good fishing that we scrapped the whole September fishing trip, the annual September fishing trip. And we started only coming in October. And I remember I came back with the minnow that was the early kind of generation of this color pattern here, and just absolutely crushed the bass on this. This is like an amazing lake fly for the Muskokas, or Chris, I've never tried it in the Kawarthas, but I imagine it'd be dynamite in the Kawarthas as well. And so yeah, that's kind of how I've come to know this fly. And it's another really easy fly. If you guys don't like the color combo, or maybe the bait fish in your fishery is a little bit different, please mix up the colors. But I love the gray, white, and pink. I think that's just I think it's a super beautiful little color fly here. So we're going to tie that one next. And I no longer say that I invented this fly, because I certainly did not. It was clearly Dave Whitlock's sheep minnow. I had just tied it with some alternate materials. But today I'm going to use, you can use a couple different synthetics if you want, but craft fur works great, or just Icelandic sheep itself. So I'm going to tie it actually with a combination of craft fur and Icelandic sheep. It's kind of a cool fly too. Actually, I got another one here. This is one in olive. When I went up with those SoFly guys up to Brennan's Harbor, like this is like my go-to fly. This one and the next one I'm going to tie. It was just a killer looking little emerald shiner kind of fly. This one's actually like a little bit more akin to Whitlock's sheep minnow. It has the hackle kind of coming down the sides, but the fish don't seem to care about that. All right. So you're going to take your hook here, and this is a saltwater hook, if everybody can see it. And this is kind of a unique step that a lot of fly patterns don't have. You're actually going to bend the hook with a pair of pliers. So I'm just going to pinch the hook very close to the eye, like that. And then I'm going to put my thumb right at the bend of the hook here. And I'm just going to push down, and I'm just going to offset it the smallest amount, really. That looks to be about right. Where's my camera?
Just to make sure, Nick, what brand hook was that?
This one here, this is a Mustad, right, that I got right here. But yeah, there's a few different ones to choose from. It's just a straight eye saltwater hook. So whatever you got as a straight eye saltwater hook is fine.
I was just going to comment that depending on the hook brand, some hooks are tempered really hard. And when you try that, you'll just snap them. So yeah, take a little trial and error. I was going to say Mustad actually makes a great hook if you have to put a little bend into it, because it's a little softer tempered.
Yeah, okay. I actually don't have
are really hard.
Gotcha. I actually don't have a lot of Mustad hooks, but this one here, it seems to work quite well. Yeah. But it's basically just a straight eye saltwater hook that's not tempered. So I'm not sure which one I put in the description there, but it was probably this one. This one's in a size 2. Again, you can just match this to whatever minnow you want. In Dave Whitlock's book, Guide to Aquatic Trout Foods, he talks about this fly just being totally versatile. You mix it up to however bait fish that you want to match. I actually only tied in 2 colors. I tied an emerald shiner, which is like this, and then I call this one here like a smelt color. That's to me a nice rainbow smelt. All right, so super easy fly to tie. We got our hook. I put it in upside down just because the minnow is actually going to ride upside down. That bend in the hook that I put in there, that's going to keel the fly, and it's going to act kind of like a rudder, and it's going to allow it to track true through the water. I sometimes do tie this fly with some lead eyes on it like that. But that's going to create a jigging action. So that one is a lot more similar to the previous fly that I tied, and it's going to kind of go up and down through the water. I just like that because sometimes I want that jigging action in the fly, and this is just such a deadly recipe. I got to have it in 2 styles. But I've really come to love the one that is unweighted. And that's when I get talking about presentation, I'll tell you how I set things up for that because it is a little bit different. So let's tie the fly first though. Okay. So we got our little bend in the hook, and we've put our hook in the vise. I'm going to move my camera a little bit closer so everybody can see what I'm doing. And I'm actually going to just start the thread pretty close to the eye, just over top of where that little bend in the hook that I put in there is. All right, this step is totally optional. You do not have to do this. But I'm going to add a gill on the fly. And all that this is just a little bit of ice dub in red. I've also used orange, but we're going to go with red. And so if anyone's never used ice dub, again, it's another synthetic fiber. It doesn't dub super tight and nice, but I don't want it super tight and nice. I want it a little bit rough around the edges here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make kind of a ball on the fly. And that's just going to act as a little bit of a gill. If you have a little dubbing pick, which I left most of my tying tools upstairs, you can pick it out. But even if you don't, it'll sort of shine through that lovely translucent Icelandic sheep fiber, and that's what we're going. If anybody knows the good old silver Rapella, and it has that little bit of red on the nose of it. Some of the old boys that I used to fish with used to think that that was the real trigger for the fish. So I like having it on my fly. I'm just going to put a little bit more because I didn't really, yeah, it's fine like that. Okay. So if you notice on this fly, I didn't really leave myself very much space on the eye of the hook. And I did that on purpose. We're going to be tying with synthetic fibers yet again. And so they're not that hard to tie in. You don't need to have a huge head on this fly. With the clouser, I gave it a little bit of a nose, but with the sheep minnow here, we're going to keep it a little bit tighter because we want a really tight head on it. And that's just to kind of create the right shape of a minnow when we do go to tie it off. So I'm going to just pull my synthetic fibers out. In the description, I think I said you could tie the whole thing with Icelandic sheep fiber. You definitely can. You could tie the whole thing with craft fur, but I'm going to do kind of a mix here. So we're going to start with our sheep. So this is sheep fiber in case anybody's never seen it. It's a really cool tying material. You ever tie with this, Chris?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, it's really nice. It's crazy soft.
Yeah, it's almost like marabou, right?
Yeah, it is. It's neat stuff. I'm sure you could probably do this even with some really nice fox.
That would be great. Yeah.
Size, but yeah.
Yeah. Is it long enough, the fox, do you think, or?
Like if you had some really nice, marble fox or something, maybe.
Nice. I like that. That sounds awesome. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I just clipped off a clump. That's about the size that you want. Again, as Chris alluded to with the other fly, less is more. We're talking about thin minnows here. We're not talking about very thick and opaque minnows. If you look at a bait fish, they often are very translucent when they hit the light. And I really think that that's what this makes this material shine, is that it is very translucent when the sunlight hits it. And we want that gill, and I'm going to put a little flash over the top. We want that to all kind of permeate through when that sunlight hits it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tie it just at the bottom of the hook here. That's actually too much fiber. Hang on. I wish I didn't have to wear a Band-Aid. Everything's sticking to my Band-Aid and it's awful. Okay.
Seems like most of our presenters have beat up fingers.
You know what that's from?
Matt, Ian.
I never wear a stripping guard, and I was in BC fishing for bull trout, and I completely cracked this like huge gape on my finger. It's so painful, but in the best way possible because it was on a fish or while fishing. Sorry, it wasn't on a single fish. Okay, so there is our belly. That's about perfect if you ask me. And I'm just going to tie it in. You guys can choose how long you want your bait fish to be. I tend to err on the smaller size. I don't go the whole length of the sheep fiber. And that's just because I'm going to tie the top with craft fur. And the craft fur fiber just isn't quite as long as the sheep fiber is. So we want it to all line up nicely. And so what I tend to do a lot is I roll the fibers in my fingers and it kind of just gets them to clump up and they're a little bit easier to handle. So I'm just going to hold it on the bottom where it's going to go. And then sheep fiber is very nice to tie in. So you're not going to have a huge head on this fly. A couple of nice tight wraps here. And that's really all it takes to secure it in. Good enough. So that's just going to sit down kind of like a beard. And then we'll just take our scissors. Good scissors are a must when tying with stuff like this. And we're just going to give it a little clip. All right, I'm not going to worry about tidying up my head right now because we'll deal with that later when the whole fly is done. So next step is we're going to take some flashabou. And I like pink because I think that it emulates the smelt quite nicely. You can also go pearl. I've done a lot with pearl. Pearl's awesome. Very, very bait fish like color. But this is just some holographic flashabou that's in the color pink. I'm going to say that it's about maybe about 8 strands or so of flashabou. That seems to be about right. Maybe 10. And I'm just going to lay it down same length as the Icelandic sheep that I've tied in. Okay. And there's a couple of wraps for that. You don't need many because we're all just wrapping right in the same spot. And give it a clip. Done. All right. Last material to tie in is craft fur. This is olive gray craft fur. You could use just gray Icelandic sheep. That works very nice too. I got this like love for olive gray craft fur. Matt will remember from our trip to Nipigon. I had a couple of flies that were tied with olive gray craft fur, and it's just something really fishy about that color. I tie a lot of flies with this stuff here. So, okay, and I'm just gonna take a clump. And I'm just pulling the under fur of the craft fur. That stuff is awful to tie in. So you can get rid of that. That'd be awesome. Okay. And then I'm just going to lay it right over the top and about as long as the sheep fiber is. Okay. And same idea. A couple of wraps to secure it. And then, how does that look from your side?
It's a little tricky to see now, but
sorry.
I get the picture. Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm just going to clip and clean up my head a little bit with my scissors. That's just the butt ends of the craft fur that I'm trimming. All right, that works. And then now I'm just going to use my thread to tidy everything up. Make a nice neat thread head on there. And we'll call that a day. So that's it for the most part. I'm just going to throw a whip finish on.
Now, when you tied that in, did you try and leave some sort of exposed hook shanks that you could glue the eyes on better, or do you try and kind of tie it all around? I can't quite tell.
Yeah, I actually don't leave an exposed hook shank. I try to glue the eyes onto the actual material itself, and I use Zap-A-Gap. Yeah, that seems to hold them on pretty good. And again, if the fish eat it and there's no eyes on the fly, it seems to work just fine. But I've actually never tried that, Chris, with leaving the hook shank like that. Okay, so I know somebody was saying, is it possible to zoom the camera in a little bit? I'm just using the camera that's as part of my computer here, and I don't think that there's a zoom option, so I apologize. But this is what we got so far. So my shadows on it. All right, so as you can see, it's a nice tapered minnow, a little bit of pink flash, a little bit of a red gill, gray top, white belly. That's it. I'm actually just going to put some eyes on it right now. And I like to put my eyes on the fly in my hand. I don't like to do it in the vise. So it's gonna be kind of hard to see, but I'm sure many of you have had experience putting eyes on the fly. If I could find where my eyes went. There. All right, so there's our eyes. It's those living eyes from fish skull, which look awesome. And these ones here are 5 or 6 mil. This seems to be about right for a fly this size. I'm the last person that should teach somebody how to put eyes on the fly because I glue my fingers together all the time. I'm gonna use Zap-A-Gap, if anybody has seen that before. You ever glue your fingers together, Chris?
Yeah, a few times.
Yeah, it's always nice when you have to pull them apart and all the skin comes off. All right, guys, this is gonna be hard for everybody to see, but I'm gonna try my best here. All right, so I'm just gonna put a little Zap-A-Gap just on the side of the fly here and catching a little bit of the material. Oh, that's way too much, but that's all right. Looks like my Zap-A-Gap. I was messing around with this last night and it made it get a little hard. Okay, so I'm just gonna push the eye onto the thread and to the material. And there's one. What do you use to glue your eyes on, Chris? Do you use the same material, Zap-A-Gap, or are you using UV resin like so many people do these days?
No, I still like super glue myself.
Yep.
I feel like UV, if I do that, I need to almost coat the eyes in it. I usually use the gel these days myself. I just find it a little easier to set, but classic
I
is nice too.
I just haven't had great luck with UVs for eyes. I think if you were to put like a super glue and then overcoat it with UV, that would be a great way to go. But I think I got these ones on there very nicely now.
That went way too smoothly.
Hey, it did go too smooth. You're right. Can everybody see that fly? That looks like a minnow if you ask me. If I had a little bit of water here, I'd run it through the water and you could really see the translucency of it. But yeah, man, that is just a deadly, deadly little minnow. It's super simple to tie. It doesn't take a lot of different materials and it looks just like a smelt does when it's in the water and it's wet. I'll try to thin it down here. There you go. That's my smelt.
Very nice. And so kind of going back to the same things that we were talking about with the last fly. So this one,
Yep.
now you're saying this is more, well, not maybe more of a lake pattern, but you get in lakes as well as maybe rivers. Is there any difference in how you fish this between a lake and a river?
So yeah, when I'm river fishing, I'm almost always using a floating line. You could use sinking lines in some of our deeper rivers, but I usually like a long leader in a river to a split shot or a weighted fly. If I was going to fish this in a river, I would still use that long leader. You might be able, well, I know for a fact that it would be great to fish an intermediate line with this in a river, but a little tiny split shot, just maybe about 6 inches, 8 inches ahead of the fly. If you take that little split shot and you put it right on the nose of the fly, you're just creating a jig. So you might as well create it. You might as well just fish a clouser. But if you take this fly in a river and you put a split shot about 8 inches away from the fly, you're actually going to get some nice unweighted action out of this. And it'll, when you strip or twitch, it'll kind of swoon and look more like a wounded minnow does. I'm definitely fishing this one a little slow, but not as slow as something like, say, the clouser does that kind of lays around the bottom. This is supposed to be more of a free swimming bait fish. So trying to get that little twitch wounded action out of it is really what we're looking for. My greatest success with this fly has been using a triple density sinking line. So fishing my favorite line that I have, I'm not even sure who makes it, but it's a type 5 to a type 3 to an intermediate. And so what that line does is the head of the line sinks quicker than the midsection, and then the other section is further up. So we're actually getting an angled presentation coming through the water column, as opposed to a level sink line that might give you a little bit of a U shape. And the reason why I like that is because the hardest thing to do when you're fishing lakes is cover water with a fly rod, and that presentation of bringing the fly up through the water column really seems to locate where those fish are going to be feeding on those bait fish. So I like a triple density sinking line. Type 5 is my go-to. Intermediate can be really fun if the bass are active and you just want to rip that streamer right across the surface a few inches below. That can be really effective too. So I would say either intermediate line on a lake or a sinking line. My preferred sinking line is a type 5 line with that's 3 different densities. And that's what I have found success with. Short leader. If you're fishing a sinking line, you don't need a long leader. Bass ain't leader shy. 3 or 4 feet, that's enough. That's good to go. And because the bass get big, I always go heavier as opposed to lighter. Something like 10 pound would be perfect, or 0x or 1x would be fine. So there's a question here, but do I use intermediate line at all in rivers? I have a little bit of experience using intermediate lines in rivers. It's if I come across a situation where I know that I'm going to be moving the streamer a little quicker, and I know that I'm going to sort of stick with that presentation, I would bring my intermediate line. But almost always, I find that I like to fish a floating line. Easier to mend. I can run a long leader. I can fish really close to the bottom with a floating line and a heavy fly. It's just my preferred method in rivers. But intermediate line in lakes is awesome when the fish are active, because you can just cast out, start stripping as soon as that fly hits the water, and you're in the zone, and you're going to see those bass come up and chase it. So another great fly, I'm not actually tying it tonight because Matt already did a tying thing with it, is I love the Murdich Minnow. That fly is just absolutely bonkers for smallmouth bass. It's probably top 3 fly for me for smallies. And that fly, I love to fish on an intermediate line and just bounce off rocks and strip when they're shallow and active. So don't throw away your intermediate line. That's an awesome tool. But my experience in the fall in October, when they're eating smelts or shiners, try tying this fly pattern and casting it out, letting that line sink a little bit, and then bringing it back at a different line retrieves. Mix it up until you find out what the fish like.
Cool. And yeah, I couldn't say what line you're fishing, but one that we've really liked is the Scientific Anglers triple densities. They make type 5 there.
That's what mine is. It's Scientific Anglers. Yeah.
I don't know who else makes one, so if anyone's looking to find one, that's
yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. Man, I was fishing a place that will remain unnamed on these channels. Well, it was okay. I was up in like Tobermory area, and I was fishing a bay, and I had some phenomenal smallmouth bass fishing this summer. And I was throwing the intermediate line the entire time, and I wasn't getting much action at all. A friend of mine was throwing some gear, but I just stuck with the fly, and I didn't catch this. I think I got one small, dinky little smallmouth, and then it wasn't until I switched over to that triple density line that you're talking about, and it just got me, I guess, a little closer to that depth that those fish were at, and allowed me to kind of cover that water. That fly line, Murdich Minnow thrown on there, and it just all of a sudden lit up, and the smallmouth were all over my fly. So line choice, it might matter more than, well, it definitely matters more than even the specific pattern that we're using. I think if you're into stillwater fly fishing, you got to have a few different lines to try. Can't just get away with a floating line, unfortunately. Yeah.
Very good. And yeah, I guess you covered the patterns that you tied in. You just tie it the one size, you said?
Yeah, that one I kind of just stick to the one size. It's a size 2, I believe. It's not a big fly. I do have a couple other sizes, but the majority of them are size 2. It's just that nice. It's the same size as the minnows that I found my fish burping up. One of my number one tips just for everybody, and I don't care if we're talking about small bass or we're talking about brown trout or what, is try to figure out what your fish are eating. You don't have to match everything specifically and get crazy about match the hatch style fly fishing or anything. But if you kind of just have a rough idea as to what those fish might be feeding on, I don't know if anybody eats the odd bass here or there, but if you do and you look in their stomach, it's amazing what some of the things are that you might find. I wouldn't recommend eating our river bass. A lot of those fish are super, super old. It's shocking how old some of those 3-pound smallmouth are. They might be 25 years old. But if you're in a place that can sustain some harvest and you keep the odd bass, they do taste okay in the cold water. Yeah, and you see what they're eating, try to match that because that'll really benefit your fly fishing. Okay,
Cool.
next one.
Move on to number 3, yeah. And
How's my speed, guys? I've never done this before. This is the first time I've ever done one of these things, and I don't know if I'm going too fast for everybody or maybe too slow.
I'll leave that to them to answer. I feel like I'm not the one to answer that. So yeah, if you guys want to slow down at all or take more time in certain steps, then jump in. And yeah, if you have other questions, then by all means, yeah, people are saying it's a good speed.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Chat if you want us to cover something else.
Cool. Okay, so we are going to tie, I'd say those 2 flies that I just showed you, I must have been fishing some variation of those flies for, I don't know, 20 years. This one here is only a few years old to me, but it has really earned a place in my fly box, and I'll tell you why. So it should be no surprise that clouser minnows are dynamite small bass fly. Another really awesome small bass fly, especially into the fall, is a lefties deceiver. That is a classic minnow imitation, and I used to tie them like mad when I was a couple years younger, let's just say. The problem with tying a lefties deceiver is I sucked at tying bucktail. Stacking that bucktail, so you'd actually layer the bucktail and you'd build a taper of a minnow as part of the fly. I'd always put way too much and then the fly would kind of never run true. But you want to give the illusion that the fly has some level of bulk to it because it's typically a fly that's going to be used for predatory game fish. I'm not too sure what species Lefty had in mind when he designed that master fly pattern, but I think it's probably caught in every freshwater fish in the world at some point or another, at least by now. And so I've really replaced that fly with the one I'm about to tie, and it is it's a little bit different, but I think it's reminiscent of that design that Lefty had originally created. It's a fly from a guy out of Pennsylvania. Surprise, surprise! I just copy what Pennsylvania anglers are doing, and his name's Jake Villwock, and he's a guide, I believe, out of PA, and he ties some beautiful looking flies. I came across this one. I was like, wow, you know what? That just looks like a deceiver to me. I bet you that would kill it for smallmouth in the fall when they're super aggressive chasing a bulkier minnow and they want some sort of meat to chow down on. And so the name of the fly is called the roamer, is what he calls it. And I tie it in. You can tie it in any color you want. I love white and chartreuse. Lefty used to say, if it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. So I've sort of stuck by that, and I like to have a little bit of chartreuse on this fly. But you could also tie it in something like the minnow gray colors. I tied some in some like pinks and stuff like that before, but the minnow gray in a natural looking color and then a white and chartreuse, that's my 2 go-tos for this fly pattern. So it's another one that just makes tying a bulky, meaty offering really simple. So I'm gonna get going on that. I love this hook. This one here is the, what is it called? It's the Universal Predator, and that's by Ahrex. And that's a dynamite hook. I use it for a lot of streamer patterns. It's in the size 1/0. And so it's a pretty big hook. But I like it. It's super strong. Like you cannot bend it if you wanted to. Yeah, I use it for lots of different streamers that you might fish for, pike, or you could even use it as a big brown trout streamer if you needed to have a really big fly for them. So it's needle point sharp. It's awesome. Ahrex makes awesome hooks. Sorry, I'm just gonna mess with my Vise for 1 second, guys. the hook doesn't fit in because it's so big. There, that ain't going anywhere. Okay, and again, thread choice, you could use white. I think I would choose white. If I had to choose one color for this, white's just neutral. I'm just not going to bother with threading my bobbin right now, just for the interest of time. I'm going to stick with the red. And so,
sorry, before we get too far into it, can you move the screen up or the Vise up to the camera a little closer again?
yeah, thanks, man. Okay, bit better. It's hard to see the hook. I can't really see it that well.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so to start, we're just taking our trusty old white natural bucktail, and we're just going to take a little piece of that. Again, if you're tying with bucktail, typically less is more. You don't need a ton of bucktail. It ties in really thick, and you're going to make your fly very bulky if you put a lot of bucktail. So whenever you're working with hair like this, just grab a piece of hair. There's always underfur, and you can kind of pull it out like that, and that's just going to create your fly, make your fly a little neater. And so what this is going to be, this is like as if you're tying a Murdich minnow. It's actually going to act as your keel of the fly. I'm actually going to put a little bit of a tail on it. So even though I'm going to have saddle feathers coming off the back end of it, I like a little bit of a bucktail here, and I just feel that it acts like almost like a rudder and keeps that fly tracking true when you're stripping it. So the length of it should be just a little bit longer than the length of the hook. I like my flies with long tails. I don't know, just an aesthetics thing. And so lay the hair along the shank of the hook, and you're going to get an idea for how long it should be. And so we're going to tie it in, and I am just going to wrap over those butts because this is a pretty bulky fly, and I don't mind a little bit of bulk underneath my thread. Like that. That's our start. So now what I got is just a little bit of white saddle hackle. These are just your typical white saddle. Don't use your fancy dry fly hackle for this kind of stuff. Just needs to be some cheap stuff here. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just kind of pairing them up together, just so you can see that they're around the same length. And that's, again, just to keep your fly neat and for aesthetics. And I'm going to tie them in. I like them just a little bit longer than that bucktail. Not much longer, just a little longer, just so it kind of hides the bucktail. And I got the stems of the feathers on either side of my hook shank here. So I'm just going to tie that in. Again, this is a bulky fly, so I'm not too worried about building a little bulk in the middle. And I'm just going to wrap those butt ends, not quite to the eye, just to the front end of the fly, and get rid of them and throw them out.
And so you said it's a sort of take on a deceiver. And
Yeah.
I like this. I tie my deceivers the same way you just tied that hackle in. But I feel like most of the commercially tied deceivers you see, they usually have the feathers sort of hugging each other. So you have a very flat wing fly, as the name would imply.
Yep.
I see you have those splayed out there. Why do you like that?
I don't know. I've just always tied my deceivers that way, to be honest. Again, I just sort of think that it's bulky. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to it. It might be that typically the hackle that I have, it does have a bit of a curve to it, and it might be hard to get that flat wing style super neat because I might just pull my hair out if I'm trying to get a perfect flat wing. But yeah. Do you have any reason why you do that? Any methodology behind doing that, or?
I just think it kicks more.
Oh, it probably does. It probably does. As I mentioned about the Murdich minnow, which I'm not tying, but I certainly am talking about a lot. It has these little, I call them bumpers, that kind of stick out the sides of the minnow. And oh boy, are those ever important. It looks stupid when the fly's dry, but when you strip that fly, those little bumpers really cause it to swoon, almost like a spoon. And you know what, Chris, I bet you're right. That's probably exactly what's happening with the hackles like this. But I've always tied it this way. I've just never really thought about it. So you could add flash here. I'm not going to do that right now. It's up to you if you want to, but if you want to flash your fly, I'm going to use polar chenille for the body, and that adds just a ton of flash to the pattern. So I'm going to use a little Senyo's laser dub here. I'm not sure exactly if what I'm about to do here has a functional purpose, but it kind of just gives the fly a color profile that I like. So I just take a little bit of that Chenille's laser dub. Awesome material. If you've never used it, you're going to want to start using it. And you just take the laser dub and you're just going to match it up like that. Kind of like I was doing with the ripple ice with the other fly. And so now we got a long fiber piece of laser dub, and I'm just going to tie it like this on the top of the fly. And I don't know, it just to me makes it look like you're blending the colors of the head into the body of the fly. And it looks nice. So I'm going to add a little piece like that, and then I'm just going to fold the rest of this over so I don't waste any material. It's probably just something that I do, or maybe I saw somebody do it, I'm not sure. So that's the start. Polar chenille, probably one of my top 10 materials to use. I feel like every fly I use, as far as streamers and things like that are concerned, I'm using polar chenille. This is a silver polar chenille for this fly. You can mix and match this however you like. Awesome material to work with, very easy to tie in. There's an end here that I'm trying to find. So there we go. That's our polar chenille. I'm going to tie it in the length of the hook shank. Again, bulky fly, adding more bulk as I tie this in. Doesn't have to be a super thin body. And now we got our polar chenille.
Sorry, Nick, were you trying to tie that in by one of the two ends in particular, or was it just the first end that you saw?
No, I was kind of looking for the end that might allow me to wrap it so the fibers lay back. Because with polar chenille, I tend to mix it up all the time and choose the wrong side. I don't think it matters. It just makes a neater fly when you have your fibers laying back. So there is actually I'm not sure what the terminology is it like a concave to the actual fiber. So when you wrap it, let's see if I did it right. Nope, I did it wrong there. I'll wrap it wrong so everybody can see. So see how the fibers are kind of going everywhere? They're kind of going straight and out to the front. We'd like them to go back. So I'm gonna actually restart my tie here and go the other way. That looks a little bit better. So I'm just doing touching wraps here with the polar chenille. And as you can see, this is like super flashy stuff. The one thing with polar chenille is you want to tie it in a little bit tight. I'm actually putting a little bit of pressure on it here. And that's because if a lovely pike grabs this fly, which they certainly love to eat this fly, and a tooth just nicks it, it's all going to come unraveled. So tie it in tight, give it a good pull. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave a little space here. This is about a 1/2 inch space on the hook shank. So now we got our nice polar chenille body, creating bulk. And if this was a lefty's deceiver, we'd actually be stacking bucktail step by step by step, creating that taper and that bulk in that fly. And then this would probably be a one fly show because they tend to take a little bit longer to tie. This is a super forgiving fly. You can make a total mess of the body and totally mess up your spacing on the hook eye here. And we're just going to put a giant clump of laser dub in as the last step, and it's going to hide everything. So it's a super awesome fly for that. This is the hardest part of the fly I'm going to do here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bucktail, same natural bucktail we had before. Quality of bucktail is important. I find you can find some really stiff fibered bucktail that just does not tie in very well. This stuff here and any of the bucktail I've ever gotten at Drift is actually super high quality. So beware of poor quality bucktail, everybody. It makes tying not so fun. Okay, so I just clipped off some hair here out of the tail. I actually took the hair from a little closer to the base here because I'm actually going to spin this a little bit. It just makes it a little bit, creates a little bit more bulk on the fly. If I took the hair right at the very tip here, this is often the stiffest stuff. If you're taking it down here near the bottom, you're getting a little bit of those hollow fibers. If you can see the fibers, they are by no means hollow, like deer hair is. But this stuff here, it'll actually be a little easier to kind of spin around the whole length of the fly. So wish me luck here, but you don't have to stack it. but I'm gonna stack it because I'm gonna try to make it a little neater. So I got it in my hair stacker. Okay. Hang on. And if you don't have one of those, you can do a method of stacking hair naturally, where you just kind of pair the fibers up, similar to what we were doing with the ripple ice and the laser dub. Okay. So now we got our bucktail, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it on the top here. The fibers are going about to where that polar chenille ends. They're just protruding past where that polar chenille is. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to essentially spin it around the shank of the hook. And I hope it goes well, because sometimes this gets messy. And so I'm just going to throw a very loose wrap, almost like you're spinning deer hair. And then I have a second wrap going around it. And I'm just going to sort of spin it around the shank of the hook here. And you can guide it with your fingers. And what we're looking for is just bucktail covering the polar chenille. All right. That went pretty good considering I'm doing it on camera. I was worried about that. Okay. So that there is our like cheater lefties deceiver. And I'm just going to trim all of the butt ends of the bucktail and make a big mess that I'm going to get in trouble with my wife about later. Deer hair is so good for marriages. Okay. And I'm just going to clean my head up here with my thread. Okay. And it's in there. That was kind of a tricky thing that I did there, guys. Is there any questions about what I just did? Have you guys worked with bucktail before and seen that method? There is an alternate way of tying in bucktail for this fly. I choose not to do that for this particular one because I find, and the method I'm talking about is called reverse stacking, where you're actually going to tie the bucktail facing forward of the fly. A lot of musky patterns use this. And what it does is it points the fibers towards the front, and then you use a pen or a cylinder to push the bucktail back, and then you tie it in. And what that does is it doesn't allow that bucktail to ever collapse in the water. This fly, it doesn't really have that problem when you have all of this polar chenille and stuff like that holding it and propping it up. So I don't really bother with that reverse method. And so, yeah, that's why I did that. Any questions about tying with the bucktail?
Not that I see here.
Okay.
But yeah, what you were saying earlier about, I think what kind of makes it, it's really not as hard as people make it out to be, I don't think, but I think the selection of the hair is important. So yeah, what you said about getting that hair from lower down on the tail, it's important. If you think about an animal, that section of the tail closest to the body,
Yeah.
that's a more important area for it to keep warm than the very tip of the tail. There's nothing really to keep warm. And so the more hollow hair down toward the base of the tail there is just meant to insulate a little bit more for the animal. That's why it gets more hollow. But like you said, every tail is a little different too, I would throw out. So like some tails, you might be able to get a similar effect from hair that's like halfway up the tail. Others might be ones closer down to the base. Yeah, you want to just experiment with the hair on the tail that you get and kind of see from what area does it flare really nicely. And you'll know pretty quickly, you just tie over it and it pops or it doesn't.
Yeah, bucktail is really one of those things that it helps when you're looking at it in person to know when you're selecting your hair. I know, like, especially when I'm in a fly shop, like looking at bucktail or deer hair, there's been many times when, you can get deer hair that just doesn't spin so nice. And usually you can develop an eye for it and even just hold the deer hair in your hand when you're in the shop. That's actually my favorite way to buy things like deer hair and bucktail, because I swear I have every color of bucktail imaginable. It's just such an awesome material. The other thing I want to say about it is you might think that it's stiff. Like when it's in your hands and it's dry, it is really stiff. The second that this goes in water, it's not quite as pliable as marabou, but it basically turns into marabou. It's amazing the movement that comes out of bucktail. So there's a reason why so many of like the traditional streamer patterns were all based around bucktail. It's just such a fish catchy material. Another word of caution for everybody. I was almost not able to tie this fly tonight because I have a Labrador retriever who likes to eat my bucktails. He is totally fine with every piece of fly tying material I have, but if he sees a bucktail, he's very sneaky and he'll take it and run outside. And he has devoured my olive and my pink bucktail. So just watch around your dogs. All right. Man, this fly went really well. We are almost done this pattern here. And so again, we're going to take that laser dub. Again, I love making heads out of laser dub. A lot of flies that I fish for trout, for some of the pike streamers that I like to tie, they're all based around laser dub heads. It's just such a versatile material. So I'm actually going to tie this head super bulky. Like that's quite a good sized clump of laser dub I got there. It might be a little bit easier to handle if you maybe start with a little bit less and then tie more in as you need it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of layering the fibers so they all line up. And I'm got a good amount here. Just gonna kind of pin them down. So there's my clump of laser dub. That's probably not going to be enough. I'm gonna have to throw a few clumps on this fly. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay it down on the top. And remember I was saying to everybody about that this fly is super forgiving and you can tie a super neat head even if you've made a mess of your bucktail. I've got a pretty big head going on here, but I got a little gap in between the eye of the hook and my little bump of thread. And so that's really where I'm gonna seat this laser dub. I'm gonna tie it in right in the middle of the laser dub. And I'm gonna just do a couple of wraps to tighten it. I'm gonna go back and get another piece of it that I have here. Again, layering it up. I'm gonna put this one right here on the side towards me. A couple of wraps. And I think I'm gonna use one more clump of laser dub here. And we're going to do the same thing. All right, so now we just got a big messy head. I'm gonna kind of pull apart some of the fibers just to sort of spread them out. And then all I gotta do is push all of that material backwards and tie a little thread head here. And that is all. That is the roamer, or what has replaced Lefty's Deceiver in my fly box. So I'm just gonna tie a little whip finish off here. Add head cement if you like. But that is a dynamite fly. I would fish this for just about any predatory freshwater fish species. I have primarily used it on bass and pike lakes. Been very effective. Pike love this fly. So if you're going to fish this fly and there is pike around, please throw a leader on the front of it, or at least some really thick mono or fluoro, because you'll lose them to the pike. But the bass absolutely love this thing. I've never got to go striped bass fishing before. I really want to. It's like top thing on my bucket list. I bet you this would be a great striped bass fly as well. It's bulky. It's a lot different than the other minnow fly that I tied. The other one I tied is very like kind of dainty and thin and translucent. This thing is big, it's fat, it moves water. This fly is something that I'd fish far more aggressively than the other two flies that I've shown tonight. So if you have bass that are in shallower water, they're eating bait, you know where they are, or even if you don't know where they are and you want to search them out, throwing this fly here on an intermediate line is a great way to fish it. You could use it on that triple density sinking line that I had mentioned before too. I like this one when you're really kind of banging the shoreline, just trying to find those fish on an intermediate line and you're moving it quite fast. That's when I'm fishing this one. So those are my my 3 bass flies. Any questions about this one specifically?
Yeah, curious. I suspect I know the answer, but so you don't have eyes on that. Is that just to maintain the profile?
No, it's just the way the recipe is. So I didn't design the fly, but Jake doesn't put eyes on his fly. I do like eyes on a lot of different flies. This one here, it hasn't been a problem not having eyes on it. I know a lot of people will say that predatory fish like to key in on the eyes. This has no problem catching fish. So I don't know, we might be just kind of making our own theories up there, but you could put eyes on this easily. The eyes would stick on nice to that laser dub and really kind of seal themselves in there. But myself personally, I do not put eyes on it. I stick to the true pattern that Jake has kind of patented, and yeah, it's a great one. I'm going to show you the other colors too. This is a super sweet color. This one's been fished before, so it's not as pretty, but it's got that grizzly hackle in the tail, and then that same idea, that laser dub at the top, and yeah, big bulky fly, catches fish, man. Takes 2 seconds to tie it. You lose them to a pike, it's not the biggest deal.
Very cool. And saying that they've replaced deceivers in your box is quite the feat for a fly.
It is. It is not because the deceiver is less effective or anything like that, though. I will say that we can't do that to Lefty, but more so because I feel like it's occupying a similar niche in my box. When it comes to smallmouth bass flies, I try to keep a bit of a minimalist approach to it. I wish I could do that for trout, but my trout boxes are just nuts. I obsess about every little detail with them. I can't seem to get my nymph patterns beyond like at least a few dozen different flies. With that species, with the brown trout and trout in particular, I just can't really become a minimalist. But I've done a good job at doing that with bass, especially when it comes to the fall. I'm like looking at my box over there, and it really is just about half a dozen different fly patterns. So I could only do one of these tying nights for fall bass fishing because I actually don't have too many other fly patterns that I'm fishing. I like to mess around a bit with sizes and colors, and if something's not working, I'll try something a little smaller. Typically, I find that particularly our bass, especially in the rivers, fishing a small fly is a very good idea. Small fly, very slowly. That will get those really finicky, fussy old bass to bite normally for me. But yeah, a minnow pattern, having a thin, translucent minnow pattern that replicates something like a smelt or a shiner, like very anatomically correct, that can be a very deadly technique. And then just having something a little bit bigger, pushing water, really kind of getting that predatory response out of that fish is also a very deadly technique to kind of switch between the two.
Cool. You probably see Dave's message there. So I think you're saying kind of on all these flies that you tied, you kind of just tie them into one size. But you mentioned that you've got about a half dozen total flies. Is that last one about as big as they get, or do they get bigger?
No, I have this one here actually in a bigger size. I think this one here is size 1. I got it in a 1/0 as well. And so you could fish larger. When I was up with the SoFly dudes in Brennan Harbor, we were throwing some pretty big flies. This was actually one that I had a ton of success with. And this was actually the fly that was bringing up the really big bass. And unfortunately, some of those fish would shy away from it right at the boat. And the guide that we were with was saying that those bigger flies, they really do bring fish up. They'll get them to come have a look. But the flies that take the big fish, they all tend to be smaller flies. And so this fly, I don't have a tape measure, but I think it's about 4 inches long, probably give or take a 1/4 inch. But a 4-inch fly for me is about what I fish for smallmouth. I have caught them on 6-inch Rapellas, and I'm not saying that they won't take bigger, but 4 inches, very sweet spot for smallies.
Very cool. And I feel like we always get the question, if you're, we talked a bit about line selection, but if you're building like your ideal, bass kit or bass setup, you say you can fish a 5 weight, would a 5 be your ideal, or would you push it toward a 6 or maybe even a 7?
So if I only had one rod for bass, that's a tough question to answer because we're talking about lakes and rivers. I'm going to say if you were going to get a specific setup, you knew you're going to fish bass in both scenarios, err on the heavy side. We have huge bass in our rivers. there are rivers around that are holding 5 pound, 6 pound. I don't know if they get bigger than that. That's as big as I've caught them up to. But we have some mega smallmouth in some of our river systems. So throwing a 7 weight, not a bad idea at all. You are not going to be overgunning them. If you've ever caught a river bass, you'll know too that they have got to be one of the strongest fighting fish. A 12, 14-inch river bass is pulling like a 20-inch brown trout. They can really put a bend in that 7 weight. So I would choose a 7 weight as my one bass rod if I was only going to have one. For me, when I'm bass fishing, I have too many rods, and so I have a lot to choose from. I do like to fish a 6 weight a lot. And that's just because I really like my 6 weight, and I have a floating line on that setup, and that's typically my go-to river rod. If I'm fishing for bass in a lake, all of my sinking lines, because if you're gonna get a rod for still water, you're going to want to get a bunch of different lines for that. So my still water rod is a 7 weight, because all my still water lines are in 7 weight. So I would recommend a 7 weight for that application. But it can be quite fun to bring the 5 weight out. I don't know if you ever do that, Chris, but I've caught some pretty huge bass on 5 weights, and it is a lot of fun. You can really put that put a good bend in that 5 weight if you hook a decent sized bass. For anybody who's local and they're looking for watersheds to try their luck on, the Grand is just an awesome one. So many smallmouth bass in the middle sections of the Grand River. That river, you'll catch a lot of smaller fish. It's got a high number of small fish. So if you're looking to really just absolutely catch a ridiculous amount of fish, that's a good spot to try. I have fished 5 weights on that, and then run into some real toad bass on that river by surprise, and that's usually where I'll get them on the 5 weight. But if you're going to some of the other systems, some of the rivers that filter into Lake Huron and to Georgian Bay, there's some really big smallmouth in those rivers. 6, 7 weight, that's perfect stick to use. Yeah.
Cool, very nice. I don't see any other questions here for the moment. I feel I need to throw out one comment, since you mentioned the Grand, is just a reminder about the exceptional waters section in the middle Grand area. So that's from, you have to look up for yourself to make sure I get it right, but basically from Paris down to, there's a footbridge above Brant Conservation Area, but in that middle section, there's protected water, and the protected water was actually introduced for the purpose of protecting the smallmouth bass. So it's 100% catch and release and barbless, which is why you get some of those great fish too. But yeah, awesome river to fish for sure. Really nice water.
Yeah, I mean, we have so much smallmouth bass in our area. I would argue that we have some of the best smallmouth bass fishing in the world here. It's a real shame that fly anglers aren't specifically targeting these fish. They take a fly just so well. The food sources that we're imitating, they're perfectly suitable to imitating with the fly. I know I can't, if you live in Southern Ontario, there's no way that you're not like 30 minutes from a spot to go fish smallmouth bass. There's some real hot spots, which I don't know, I'm scared to hotspot anywhere in particular, but a little bit of Googling, talking to some of your local guides. There's some phenomenal local guides that are actually specializing in smallmouth bass, and looking for one of them to go out with and learn some of the waters. It will really open your eyes as to how good the fisheries are around here, and also just how dialed into bass you can really be, because I don't want to throw numbers around, but it's not unusual to catch multiple trophies in a day if you're in the right spot.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, Dave Lee makes a good point. When the Grand isn't getting inundated with tubes and rafts from the rafting company.
Oh my goodness, isn't that fun? I know there's so many in the summertime, but I tell you what, you don't see so many in October. In October, a lot of the tube hatch has really died down. And that's another beautiful part of fall, is we don't get the swimmers and the other recreationalists using the river in the same way, as well as, I mean, you have the leaves turning colors, and those big bass are really putting the feed bag on. More so than any other species, I find that bass are just gorging themselves as it comes closer to the winter. So, yeah.
Worth noting that those tubers aren't right through the entire river too, though. Like they're a good bass right up to Fergus. You know, my first solid fish of the year. Got a 3-pound fish up above Fergus, like right up top where it's ice cold. They're rarer up there, but there are good bass right through the river. So don't think you only have to fish that one stretch.
Yeah, there's good bass fishing throughout the entire Grand. I've caught them in the trout sections before, but I've heard some rumors that there's some pretty good bass fishing even in those trout sections. So
yeah, I think they grow even slower. Like when you say river bass grow slow, I think those ones are super slow because of how cold the water is.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's through there for sure.
Yeah, no, it's good. The one thing I'm going to reiterate again, because for me, when I'm learning something new or somebody's giving a lecture, I like when people repeat things. I really just want to reiterate, when you're fishing river bass, one of the best things that you can do is slow your presentation down, especially in the fall. But really those little rod twitches, long leader, get that fly really close to the bottom and hang on tight, because if you're fishing one of those dark flashy minnows, I think that's a real thing to take away from this. I've had phenomenal fishing in that style, and I hope everybody at least gives that a try. If you're lucky enough to have access to some of these smaller lakes, my experience is mainly around the Muskokas, and even in Algonquin. If anyone's ever been to Algonquin Park fishing for bass, there's some mega bass fishing in Algonquin, if you pick your lake right. And fishing those smaller bait fish flies at creek mouths on flats that get a lot of sun, that has just totally changed blew my mind, how good the fishing can be from time to time, especially in late September, and then into October. And I'll go bass fishing up until the point when we start getting frosty nights. You get a frosty night, I don't know. I feel like the bass have slowed down, and I'm ready to go try to find some steelhead. But last year, the first week in November was on fire. I had a wonderful day, getting some real serious smallmouth first week in November. And that was pretty surprising.
Yeah, don't ram off. Lots of season left for sure.
Oh man, we got tons coming. And then the other thing to mention is that in a lot of the bass rivers, you do have other species as well that these techniques work very good on. A lot of walleye in the Grand. They certainly like a dark fly twitch close to the bottom. It's a pretty effective walleye presentation. And then if you're fishing some of the bigger minnow flies, you might even run into a muskie. So look out. Which is what Chris is hoping to do next week.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on, Nick. We'll have you back maybe to do some summer bass at some point. That'd be fun.
Summer bass, yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I'll be tying lots of different crayfish flies, I guess, because I don't know, man. But crayfish flies are just so fun to really customize and play around with. I don't know. I tie them all with eyes and everything, and probably don't need to go to that level of detail, but certainly is fun. But yeah, guys, if you haven't given it a try smallmouth bass fishing. The one thing I would love, a lot of you guys on here, I see some unfamiliar names. If you guys have any success with these flies, I would love to hear about it. I would love to hear that you took something useful away from this. As I was mentioning, this is the first time I've ever done one of these. I know my camera and lighting setup could use a little work here, but I would really appreciate if you guys wanted to give me some feedback, or just tell me some fish stories. I just love hearing fish stories, especially if it's something that I've shared and it works for other people, because that's really the whole point in doing this. It's nice to connect with everybody.
Terrific. I think you did a great job there. We'll definitely have you back. For everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. We will have, as promised, this video edited down a little bit, but then posted to YouTube in the next day or two for you, and you'll get an email invite to that, just for your eyes, and then it'll eventually be released. And then we also have another presentation coming up next week, same date and time, or same day and time, with Maxim Sandich, who will be doing some really cool steelhead patterns for us as well. So we'll have that available for booking as of tomorrow. You can watch for that. In the meantime, if you need any of the materials today, we've got all shop. And then, yeah, of course, if you want spots and stuff, we're always very open to helping out direct folks too. So thanks again for tuning in, and have a good night. We'll hope to see you all next week.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Take care.